I have the pleasure of introducing our next speaker on a topic which is U.S.-China relations from a Washington perspective. My name is Peter Bazos. I'm the General Counsel for Southern Star Shipping, which is the New York offices of the Kumanteros family. Been with the family for about 10 years. And I think I'm uniquely positioned to introduce the next speaker because unless there's someone else in the room, I think I'm the only shipping lawyer who's Greek, who lived in Norway, who speaks Chinese, and also went to the George Washington University where Professor Sutter teaches. So, today's topic, we've kind of, it's been a constant refrain from throughout the different panels, which is a U.S.-China relationship, which was something that I think we can thank Messrs. Maitland and Stratakis for kind of pushing to include in this panel to make it relevant to all of you, which I think is as the Russia invasion of Ukraine has shown us that these black swan events, although they're definitionally black swan for a reason, which is that you couldn't predict them, it doesn't mean that we can't start running through the possibilities of the what ifs and what could happen. And the biggest, I guess the 800-pound gorilla in the room is the U.S.-China relationship, which we have seen evolved, myself personally, over the past decade specifically, but 20 years since my interest in China sparked, a student at George Washington University. And so to talk about this today, we have Professor Sutter, who is prior to starting at George Washington, teaching at George Washington, where he's still a professor, in 2011, spent I think over 3 decades, or just about 3 decades, in government, working at the Foreign Affairs and National Defense Division of the Congressional Research Service. He was at the National Intelligence Council and the Department of State's Bureau of Intelligence and Research. He's been at George Washington since 2011, and he's author of over 22 books. I think the most recent one is U.S.-China Relations: Perilous Past, Uncertain Future. So he's a well-positioned expert on the topic of U.S.-China relations. And without further ado, attention to Professor Sutter. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. That was really, I appreciate the kind introduction. It's a wonderful opportunity for me to be with you here today. I live in Washington, and people in Washington often think that policy is made in Washington, inside the Beltway. And of course, I've lived there for 50 years. I've worked for the Congress for 24 years. I worked for the intelligence community for about 11 years. And of course, that isn't always true. But it is true in this case. That's what I want to tell you about, because I find people don't understand this. Why is this happening? It wasn't very long ago that we wanted to engage China. Why did this change? And where did it change? And so this is something I've been following for 5 years now, and it happened in Washington. It happened inside the Beltway. And what you found is administration people, not Mr. Trump, but administration people came to the judgment that China was an overriding danger to the United States. This happened all of a sudden with their national security strategy in December of 2017. Nobody read that document. The media didn't pay any attention to it, but that was their position. But you know who did say yes? The Congress. Bipartisan majorities in the Congress. They listened to these people, they thought about it themselves, and they came to judgments on this. And I haven't gotten down to the bottom of this, why it happened, and each individual member is different, of course, but there was no public outcry for this. Public opinion wasn't calling for this. The media wasn't calling for this. There was no special interest that was pushing this kind of thing. Where did it come from? It came from the calculations of members of Congress, Republicans and Democrats, looking at the situation. What are they doing? They're trying to protect their constituents. They take that seriously. And what happened here is that they said, this is a real danger to us. And so I find explaining this process, this never happens in foreign policy. In recent decades, it's always been the Congress trying to steal power from the president, or the president stealing power from Congress. and the Republicans and Democrats, they don't agree on anything. All of this is not the case in dealing with China. The convergence is very strong, and they stuck to it. And they said in 2018, we need a whole of government pushback against these challenges coming from China. That's in the National Defense Authorization Act of August of 2018. And they've been pushing this ever since. Now, Mr. Trump, no, he was very erratic on this issue. His administration on economic issues was very erratic. The Democratic candidates in the election of 2019 and 20, the primaries, they hardly ever spoke about China. It's not important. Joe Biden asked about this repeatedly. He said, I'm not worried about China. We're much stronger than China. Jake Sullivan, Mr. Cerebral National Security Advisor, he was asked about this in July 2019. He said, if American public opinion isn't concerned about China, why should the candidates be concerned about China? So Mr. Trump, I'm not sure Mr. Trump has changed, but certainly Mr. Biden has changed enormously, along with Blinken and Sullivan and company. They have been brought into this Washington consensus on this issue. And so this has been going on for 5 years, and with fits and starts, but it's very steady now. With COVID in 2020, public opinion then swung against China. The media then swung against China, mainstream media. They weren't before. Now they are. And of course, this balloon episode just reinforces public opinion critical of China. So over the past year, I'm going to focus on that a bit. Over the past year, what we have is a lot of momentum in this area. But first, I need to explain why this sense of urgency? Why this sense that we've got to do this? That this is job one. Why? Why that? And it sort of boils down to this. There are so many challenges posed by the Chinese government's and party state practices for the United States that you can't really, you have to have a long list. So I grouped them. They're groups. One is the security group. There's a whole bunch of challenges there. Another one is the economic group. And the third one is governance. And in these kinds of fields, what you find is that on the security side, the most concerned is about the balance of power in Asia. And the U.S. has tried to maintain a favorable balance of power in Asia since it defeated Japan in the Second World War. And China is moving to be the dominant power in Asia. And it's doing so very much in a headlong way, seeking wealth and power at the expense of others. On the economic side, you have all sorts of infractions that the Chinese practice, just basically exploiting the liberal economic order and carrying out all sorts of practices that are very negative for the United States and for many other countries. They're designed to help China. And then in the realm of governance, the Chinese are prone, more than any other country, to use elements that they have as sources of leverage to coerce other countries to do what they want. In this context of broad challenges, there are two that are most serious. The first one is if China dominates Asia. If they become the dominant power of Asia, this is something that U.S. strategists have looked at, and they equate it to Hitler dominating Western Europe, or Japan dominating Asia, Imperial Japan. It's the same thing. That will be a threat to us, and Japan proved that. Once they had dominance in Asia, they became a direct threat to the United States. So that logic is very, very strong, I think, in Washington, and I think it's strong among strategists. So that's an existential danger. But the other one is probably more important, and this is the economic one. The Chinese have lots of profits. They've made lots of money doing lots of things that come at the expense, particularly of the United States, but many others. And they've done this in very, sometimes nefarious ways, sometimes straightforward ways, but very often not. And not consistent with international norms, but they're able to get away with it because they're so powerful, and companies and governments don't want to confront them. So it works out pretty well for them. And so this kind of situation, what are they doing with this money? What are they doing? Well, they're investing it because they want to be the high technology leader of the future. And they see the United States as the high technology leader, and they are very much against that. And they want it because that makes them insecure. If the United States has this high technology dominance, then they feel they're under the gun. And so, so they're striving very hard to prevent that. But this isn't like an ordinary arms race. This is high technology. You're dealing with stuff that hasn't even been invented yet. So how do you know that you're going to be secure? In an arms race, you know when you're going to be secure. I've got this weapon, they've got that weapon. You've got to figure it out. Not in high technology. And so the upshot here, they're striving to be the dominant force here. And if they do, if they become the dominant force, then this segment of the U.S. economy will suffer greatly. The U.S. will no longer be the leading power and leading economic force in this area, and China will dominate it. But more important, the militaries of the world rely on high technology. If China dominates high technology, they will dominate militarily. And in Congress and in the administration, they will dominate. It's this concern about being dominated by China that's driving this situation. So this has been going on for 5 years, and it has momentum. This year has been despite distractions, this past year has shown remarkable momentum. The first distraction, the Russians attacked Ukraine. This should divert U.S. attention away from China. This should focus on Russia, right? This is what logically should happen. Well, it didn't happen. China was the largest international enabler of the Russian attack on Ukraine and the war on Ukraine. And so the United States looked at China in this light in a very negative way. But moreover, the allies in Europe and European NATO and the EU looked at this situation. They said, oh my goodness, China is enabling Russia to do these kinds of dangers to us. That has changed their opinion on this, and they have become much harder on dealing with China on a whole range of issues, much more cooperative with the United States. So it's added to this momentum that you find behind the move to deal with China. And the second distraction happened because the Ukraine situation made countries in Asia, like Japan and South Korea, worry about China more. But then China took actions against Speaker Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan in extraordinary ways. 4 days of exercises surrounding Taiwan, showing a blockade possibility and so forth. That unprecedented pressure on Taiwan. So that led to a debate. The United States had a debate on this, and you probably followed it. Tom Friedman got involved in this, and all sorts of people got involved in this. And it went on for about 3 weeks. And then it stopped. And what impact did it have on policy? Nothing. And the impact was more to resolve, to do things for Taiwan going forward. So more congressional delegations went. Mr. Biden once again said, we'll defend Taiwan if it's attacked by China. And a new economic agreement with Taiwan was begun. More arms sales to Taiwan took place. And so Taiwan is a key element here. And so this was the state of play here. And so what you find in this situation is that this is momentum. And then three other big elements are part of the momentum. One was the CHIPS and Science Act, $280 billion to compete with China in high technology, computer chips and high technology overall. And then the Anti-Inflation Act, $365 billion for climate change types of infrastructure with numerous provisions targeting China. So this is like, what, over $600 billion in 1 year. Pretty good. That's momentum. And then the administration follows up with these crippling sanctions against computer chip technology advanced computer chip technology going to China. And then this year we have a situation where you're going to find that we have Republicans in Congress are in charge now, and the Republicans seem to be harder than the Democrats. But I don't think the partisan divisions are going to matter that much. We have a very close consensus between the majorities of the Democrats, liberals, moderates, conservatives, and Republicans on this issue, on China, the danger of China. And so I think they're just going to cooperate a lot more. And the Republicans are going to do oversight hearings. They're going to look at how the money's being spent, this kind of thing. And they may have some posturing things. There are bomb throwers in both parties, and so there will be some episodes of this. But this has been a uniquely nonpartisan type of enterprise. And it's totally out of line with the usual pattern of American policy toward China, where the administration does something and the Congress resists in some way. That pattern is gone. This is symbiosis, where these two are cooperating together. Now, the hot spot, of course, as you know, is Taiwan. And Taiwan, what's going to happen in Taiwan? And my students, I work at a fairly liberal school, and the students don't like anybody that talks like this. They really don't. They want to say, well, how can we fix this? You see? How can we improve the situation? And I admire that, but you can say I've been at this a long time. And unfortunately, I have this outlook of how I see it. And so, and I share it with them, and they're very kind. They listen, but I don't think they agree. But anyway, the point here on the Taiwan issue, well, what's happening here? China is trying to change the status quo in the Taiwan Straits. They see the government in Taiwan is not to their liking, and so they're exerting enormous pressure on these people from a security point of view, from an economic point of view, and a diplomatic point of view. And the Trump administration and the Biden administration said, we want the status quo preserved. We will change it back. And so that's one element of what they're doing. The second thing that they're doing is the location of Taiwan is very important. If the United States is going to have a strategy to deal with China, it's going to have a friendly situation in Taiwan. It's critically important. The third element is that Taiwan is a very important country for economic reasons and for computer chips and for democracy. And so that's very important. So these things are all driving the United States to be very supportive of Taiwan. In addition, the old days when we would sacrifice ties for Taiwan for the sake of our relationship with Beijing, and we did that constantly in various administrations. That was the main reason we wouldn't do things with Taiwan, because it would upset Beijing and upset the relationship with Beijing. Those days are gone. The Trump trade war began destroying that relationship, as you saw. And so there is no that type of relationship with China. In addition, the allies and partners in Asia didn't want trouble with China over Taiwan, didn't want the US to do this, but those, because it would upset the relationship with Beijing. Well, again, that relationship has already been upset. And the third thing that we would worry about from the United States is that will the Taiwan leadership be provocative? Will they use the support to bait Beijing and cause a conflict? The government in Taiwan today is run by a person who is very, very steady. So that's not in the picture. So the only real deterrent is the danger of Beijing. What will they do? And so what has China done? Well, in this period of US momentum, you find that in November, the United States, Mr. Biden, good old seemingly wishy-washy Joe Biden, looked pretty powerful. He was powerful at the G20. He convened, he stopped the music, and they had a convention, a group of the majority of the members were all there to deal with this missile in Poland that took place. And he just did that. He has the power to do that now. Ukraine has had a tremendous impact. And then he went to COP27, and with a $365 billion bill supporting him. And so he had a lot of momentum. Xi Jinping is in hard times. He's just coming out. He's defensive. He's now in his third term, and he was very hard line up to that point, up to the Congress where he got his third term for 5 years in the Party Congress of 2020, October 2020. So he's coming off that. But he has economic problems at home. He had COVID problems at home. He has a declining population now. The economy isn't doing real well, and issues of that. Plus, his confrontation with the United States was not working. It's not working. It's getting worse. So what did he do? He compromised. Chinese leaders almost never acknowledge compromising. I've been looking at China for 50 years. They've never made a mistake in foreign affairs. Do you know that? Never. There was one time they acknowledged making a mistake in foreign affairs. That anybody knows more, let me know, but I've been tracking this. And so the result is that when they do compromise, it's extremely significant. When reading Biden, Mr. Biden has wanted to, on the one hand, he obviously is putting pressure, he's obviously defending America against these Chinese challenges. On the other hand, he doesn't want a war. And he's been trying for a year and a half to get the Chinese to come to some understandings of guardrails so that we don't have a war. Very sensible position. And the Chinese say, we won't do it until you change your policy. And then they'll give the secretary, say, here's a list of things you have to do. And they did that several times, most recently in July of last year. And so, no list this time. In November, they just went ahead and said, okay, let's have these talks. Let's move ahead with this. And there was no precondition. And they started being very nice to the United States, to Japan, Australia, in public posture. They didn't change the substance of their policy, but in public posture, they were nice. And so in this kind of a situation, Mr. Xi Jinping, facing a lot of challenges, what exactly is he going to do? And on Taiwan, he seems to be a bit on the defensive at this point. And so I can't really speculate very well about what he will do. That's an uncertain situation. But looking out, what I see is a situation where the United States this year will carry forth a whole series of proposals that will limit more U.S. engagement with China. The biggest thing, I guess, will be U.S. investment, portfolio investment in China, going to Chinese entities. That's going to be screened. But more support for Taiwan is definitely in the cards. The exercise of China last year showed they need more weapons, and the U.S. needs to work with them to build up a defense force in Taiwan that can sustain the situation. And the U.S. is working very hard to build up a deterrent network in the region. And doing that, and to the point now where 20 years ago, when I was a National Intelligence Officer for East Asia, I did 2 estimates, national intelligence estimates on Taiwan. We assumed who's going to be on our side if there's a conflict? Nobody. Today, who's going to be on our side? Japan. Look at what they're doing. Australia. Now the Philippines are now open to having bases. NATO. The Europeans, not that they're going to fight, although I think the British would fight, but they're going to use economic pressures to deal with this kind of a situation. So looking out, I see more tension this year, next year, and I think we can manage it. When I tell my students, you can see I'm old. I remember the Cold War. I lived through the Cold War. And I lived in New York, where the newspaper, every time the Russians did one of these big tests, they'd have a big bullseye and show, okay, this part is going to be totally destroyed. And out here where I lived, we were going to be fried, but not totally destroyed, and that kind of map. You know, that was what we did. Bomb shelters, you know, kids under the desk, all that sort of stuff. And so but in the Cold War, we managed. We don't remember the tensions too much. And my students don't know it at all. And I say, look, tensions can be managed. Every day, working at the CIA and other places during this period, we said, we didn't say this, but we were aware, the Soviets had 30,000 nuclear warheads, most of them aimed at us. And we had 30,000 nuclear warheads, mostly aimed at them. That's dangerous. And everybody knew it. And we lived with that. And we didn't have a war. And I see lots of reasons why we won't have a war in this case. So I've tried to explain the situation in Washington and the dynamic and the forces behind it. And I know, and with a prognosis that this is the way it's going to be for the next 2 years. If we get an America First president, that's something that could change this. If they treat the allies and partners, Donald Trump treated the allies and partners, that will very much upset this kind of calculation, this effort that's underway. I don't think that will happen, though. I think the Republicans in Congress, as well as the Democrats, will resist that. It's very hard to break out of this, it seems to me. They have made their calculations, and they see this as very much necessary to keep that broad front to deal with the challenges posed by China. Thank you for your patience, and I look forward to your questions.
So I have a question. Is Washington making a concerted effort to ensure that we as a country are not so dependent on China anymore?
Yeah.
Are they?
Yeah, yes. I think in the sense where it's disadvantageous to the United States. Definitely. Secure supply chains are talked about all the time. And that's a buzzword for, say, not with China in the supply chain. And just look at the rhetoric. Every place they go in Asia, they with all these Asia-Pacific countries, the Indo-Pacific strategy. It's the East Asian Economic Prosperity Framework. That's their economic venture. Secure supply chains are very much a part of that, and that's what that means. It's not for everything, but it's certainly for significant products.
Very good, Professor. It was very interesting. I represent a ship owner. So there's different types of war, right? We're saying there's no hot war, but we just talked about that question. There's technology wars, there's trade wars, and that's my concern. Do you see a tightening of the trade war, isolationism, people getting their raw materials and such closer and affecting shipping going forward in terms of reducing ton miles instead of extending, which has been happening over the last decade?
Yes. That's the trend. How far?
I didn't want to hear that answer.
I know. I know. And now you run the risk, if you start saying that, you run the risk of being seen as sort of unpatriotic with these Chinese sending balloons over our country to keep eyes on us. So that's where we are at this point, it seems to me. And the business community that has an interest in China doesn't like this one bit. They tried to be part of that debate after the Pelosi visit, but it didn't work. And I think they'll keep trying, but now they're doing very low-profile lobbying, but no ads in the newspaper or anything like that to do this kind of thing.
Thank you, Professor. Hello. Shocker to hear that your students are liberal.
Not all of them, but many of them are.
And that's sort of my question. You say you're old, but a lot of us in the room, I think, have children your age or soon to be the age of your students. Do they have any real sense of realpolitik, or, as Robert Bugbee discussed at lunch, America's central role in the liberal order of things in the world, or do they just think that we're all bad?
That we're all bad.
Yeah,
Nope.
yeah. Do they have any sense of history of what's happened during the Cold War and our role? Or
Well, you have to teach them that in general, but they understand it. And they study realism, and realism is an international relations theory that emphasizes this type of thing, that we're in an anarchic world and you need to keep your power and that type of thing. So they understand that but they want to fix it. They have this idea that they want to fix it. And that's the key thing. And I'm not sure that's liberal or conservative. I don't know what that is, but but I think that's a common thing. So that's where and I'm an old intelligence officer. Intelligence officers don't fix anything. They just tell you, oh, what a great problem we have. And here it is. I'm going to lay it out for you. Here's the problem. Goodbye. Good luck with it. They don't have to do the policy making, and they don't want to do it. So that's what I gave you. It's sort of an intelligence. Here's the problem. Good luck, folks. That type of thing. Gentleman there.
Excuse me. Do you think this would have any effect, the policies being in place that you've talked about with the shipbuilding in China? And what effect would it have on shipbuilding itself in
haven't
China?
followed that. I mean, China is a big shipbuilder, I know that, but I really don't know the details of this. And if the shipping industry declines, that'll have a big impact on that industry. And they'll have to suck it up and do something else.
Are there any policies you know? U.S. about building or plans to prevent people from building in China?
Building ships in China?
Right,
Civilian ships? I don't think so. None that I know of.
commercial ships.
Merchant ships? No, I don't think so. That's, I don't know, but I haven't seen that. And I don't think, there's going to be an awful lot that continues. It's going to be an awful, I mean, I just read an interview with the chairman of the new House committee, Mr. Gallagher, and he wants to keep lots of relationships with China. And so he's seen as the epitome of the conservative view, but he's very sensible in that he's not arguing for a total ban or anything like that. It's going to be, and Mr. Sullivan puts it this way: we're going to have small yards and high fences, and so that's what he says, and that means that the areas affected will not be all that big, but the boundaries of getting through there will be very big, will be hard. Okay, well, I want to thank you all very much, and